transform your charity with PowerPoint and Microsoft 365 by Stasey. I work for SmartDesk. I'm the head of automation services, and my contact details are on the screen for you. SmartDesk are a UK organisation and a Microsoft Gold partner, and I specialise in automation services. I'm really conscious that there's an information overload that makes us feel busier and busier, and there's always more to read and check and do. And we feel consciously busy, and that's one of the key parts of the opportunity, particularly in charities as well as in social care and some other sectors. And I'm really grateful today that I've had the opportunity to present at DynamicsCon. So thank you very much to everybody at DynamicsCon for the opportunity to talk about some of the work we're doing and some of the ways that we've managed to use the Microsoft Power Platform and Microsoft 365 for betterment of charities within the UK. So this busyness epidemic that I'm talking about, there's all these antiquated processes and endless unread emails and messages that makes work start to feel really, really stressful. And we're really conscious that feeling busy and being productive can be quite different things. And I think that's one of the things that Power Platform can really help you to address. The private sector have generally innovated a lot earlier. They went paperless, they offshored, then they right-shored, then they've acquired, they've automated, and they've built and built upon all of this better practice over the last 15 or 20 years, which has meant that there's not an awful lot of processes that need fixing, or where they are, they've been fixed somewhat over a longer period of time. In the public sector, local authorities, other organisations that work for the community have refined some of their processes, they've transformed, they've implemented ERP solutions, at least in the UK, over the last 10 years, and they've refined and digitised themselves quite a lot. But what we're really conscious of is that, at least in the UK, the charity sector has really been left behind, partly because they're smaller organisations, they couldn't afford those huge solutions, partly because it's just a different expectation of the way that people work in the charity sector, and they're more willing to have not gone through digital transformation, rapid adoption of technology, and embedding change to the same extent that a corporate would. So I really want to discuss the impacts of digital disruption, potentially on all sectors, but particularly on the charity sector. So previously, there were really only two models of business. There were companies that were responsible for goods and companies that were responsible for services. And all organisations really fitted into goods or services. And then these disruptive models came along. So things like Uber, Airbnb, Alibaba. But then really, really interestingly, technology creators came along, including Microsoft. And they did something really, really different and fundamental, and create this really great opportunity for light touch automation, for automating easily, for being able to, essentially for being all smaller organisations and charities being able to do that thing better that they're already doing. And I think that's the size of the prize currently. If you want to help yourself with some of these things, then digital disruption in those big technology partners is a massive opportunity, and particularly in Microsoft and fundamentally in Power Platform. So digital transformation is one of those things that everybody seems to be going, oh yeah, I'll have 3 of those. And I think it's important to acknowledge that you can do a gradual transformation that can take a number of years. So you could go onto cloud servers with your existing technology. You could implement cloud apps for things like HR systems or ERP systems or marketing systems. You could address the system processes and strive for better processes and process gold. You could do the transformation that sits on top of that. But then you can also do this thing called hyper automation. But I think that there's an opportunity, or at least some of the work that we've been doing, we've jumped straight into hyper automating some processes without necessarily addressing all of those pieces that you could stack that on top of, which has enabled us to do a lot more with a lot less. So I think it's really important to acknowledge that there are hyper automation tools that are available to you now in the Power Platform, and that's for all organisations, including charities, and you don't necessarily have to do a huge digital transformation prior to getting there, which is really incredibly exciting because that hasn't been the case before. So I suppose a key question is, why automate in charities? And I think really that comes down to why charities exist. So they're funded by donations and tax for providing some public services, but people are giving their money specifically because they want to help the beneficiaries of the charity, help the mission of the charity. They believe in that. And I think a lot of people would be disappointed to find out that money was swallowed up in wasteful processes, or time, or beneficiaries' time was wasted expecting a person to get a piece of data and take it from one place to another. So I think that that's really key to why, but also there should always be a striving in a charity to do more with less. So to have a bigger impact on the world without having to spend more of the money that's donated to them or given to them for providing service. And I think that's really key to why we should be doing this work. And I think it's a fantastic opportunity. If there are any questions, please post them in the chat and we'll cover them at the end. So I want to talk specifically about one of the things that has happened to all of us. So COVID-19 has shown us that there's this potential for aggregating all of this live data in healthcare. And that's been global and hugely transformative. And that could be applied again similarly to many charitable missions across the globe. And it could save and transform lives with the ability to quickly share data, aggregate that data, and be able to do something as a direct result of seeing where the impact needs to be, seeing what the trends and patterns are immediately, rather than the view that you would have to gather the data over a long period of time and then get people to submit it and then later analyse it. And I think really this is one of the key opportunities in the charity sector, to be able to get live data and analyse it in a different place, which typically hasn't been the case. A lot of charities have been very, very paper-based, and then digitised Word documents sent on an email that someone will eventually compile is very, very different to being able to look at them live. And I think this is a really integral part of what we should be focusing on. And then if we look at desk-based workers, they can spend up to 60% of their time doing things that are called workaround work. So things like searching for information, catching up on the status of a piece of work, a project, something they've briefed somebody, checking with people, compiling things, reviewing exports in Excel or what they might call reports, cutting and pasting information, looking in folders and holding status meetings. And really all of that time is not spent doing the thing in which they have their skill set. It's not their specialism. And there's a massive opportunity because charities do have office workers to take advantage of some of the technology so that you can spend less time doing this stuff and more time getting the work done rather than the work around the work, finding the email, those sorts of things. And that's really integral to some of the opportunities in Power Platform. So yeah, what if we use Power Platform to give back that wasted time? So that 60%, what would that look like? What would that mean? How could you transform the charities that you're a trustee or if you work for or you volunteer for, by utilising Power Platform. So I suppose the next question is, what is the Power Platform? So essentially there are 4 key components. There's business analytics, which is the dashboards, the graphs, the tables, the charts in Power BI. So it's a really rich, functional solution that can be integrated into other Microsoft products and integrated into other aspects of the Power Platform. There's Power Apps, which are low-code apps that you can build within the Microsoft environment. There's Power Automate for automation of workflows, if this then that, automated triggers driving something to happen, driving an action. And then there's Power Virtual Agents, which are essentially pre-programming scripts for chatbots, which is relatively new. It might seem quite alien, but is definitely one of the biggest opportunities, particularly if you have a small workforce or you've got a 24/7 website offering people some sort of advice, navigation, rather than feeling like they have to keep searching through your website. If you build some standard FAQs into your chatbot, then you can enable people to get to different pieces of information or submit different things to you quite quickly and quite lightly. So I think Power Virtual Agents is a really key part of the next few steps through the opportunity, if you like, in Power Platform. And then I suppose, what is Microsoft 365? So an important thing to consider is that all of the Microsoft 365 products plug into each other and play quite nicely. So as well as those low-code applications you might build in Power Apps or those low-code automation workflows that you might make in Power Automate, you've also got all of these other tools that you can very easily plug into those Power Platform solutions easily, lightly, simply, without necessarily needing to be able to code, which is a fantastic opportunity, particularly when you're a small organisation, you're trying to do things that aren't going to be infinitely expensive before you've seen any value whatsoever. So yeah, here's a view of all of the tools in Microsoft 365 at present. I'm sure there will be more coming. So I suppose what we should get on to is, what did we do with some of the organisations that I've been helping most recently? And one of the things that I've been working on is some frontline automation. During the COVID-19 pandemic, that caused a mental health epidemic all across the world. And in some of the UK mental health charities, what we had is clinical support via submission of a web form that was provided for free as part of our National Health Service to anybody in lots of pockets of the UK. So what happened was we ended up with adopting a service that had previously been managed by somebody else into one of the charities that I'm responsible for. So there was 1,000 people on this waiting list that were all very much struggling with their mental health, had filled out a very simplistic form, but we didn't really understand some of the detail of what they needed. And because that form was linked to a legacy system, there wasn't an awful lot we could do with the system provider. They couldn't help us in order to help identify which of those people needed which sort of support, and which of those people weren't really suitable for the service and needed to be referred elsewhere, and which of those people had a critical and urgent need. So we were trying to do as much as we possibly could with as little as we had. And in reality, there's only a limited number of clinicians in the UK, and all of them were resourced because there was a mental health epidemic. So everybody had jumped in and been available, but still across the UK, there was more demand than there was supply. And therefore, within the geographical region of the UK, we had this problem with these 1,000 people on this waiting list, and we needed to work out how we could triage them more effectively. And I spoke to the person that was running that service, and she suggested something to do with a form to pre-assess people, to ask them some questions to be able to predict some or find out some of the information that typically would be in a 90-minute assessment, in order that the assessment could be shorter, so that nobody was missing out on any of their pre-agreed, scheduled, required therapy, depending on their need, but it was freeing up some of the frontline resource. So after much discussion, we produced a Microsoft form into a Power Automate into Planner. That was live within 4 days of somebody asking a question. Does anybody know how I could make a form on the internet? Because often people in clinical settings, that would be their question. They wouldn't have any more technical understanding than that. So we produced that, we locked it down, made it nice and secure, served it up in Planner for a couple of administrators in one of the services. So that they could then cut and paste that data into the legacy system, because at the time we didn't even have the luxury of being able to integrate that data. So that meant that we could do something instantly. And when we were in the darkest part of the pandemic, that was really important, because we found that after a few weeks, 2 people had written to us saying, "Thank you so much, that saved my life." As well as reducing a waiting list from 11 weeks to 4.5 weeks for hundreds of the people on that waiting list as we worked through it. So that was really vital work. And then what we did is I spoke to another Microsoft Gold partner, and they built us a Power App, which took another 2 weeks. So they had some resource for that. So they used the same Microsoft form. They pulled it into customer voice, which is one of the things that you can do within Power Apps of Dynamics. So they literally just ripped the template of the form directly into their system. No need to make another thing, because everything's all Microsoft and plays really nicely with each other. They created this Power App, and that was live in another 2 weeks. That was less than 3 weeks from somebody saying, "We have this problem, we need to do something." And then since then, we've built an API integration into the legacy system, because there are some restrictions as to which systems you're allowed to use because of how the work is funded in the UK. There's some questions around opportunities to do things more efficiently, but that's where we are at the moment. So we've been able to, from this form to Power Apps, this API integration, get the data directly into the legacy system without the need for any manual cut and paste, touching, errors, anything like that. So we've gone from half an hour of admin and 90 minutes of clinician time in triage appointment to 31 minutes total. So 30 minutes of clinical time, 20-minute appointment, 10-minute write-up, and less than 1 minute of administrative time, because there's an automation of form triggers that are sent via SMS and email. Once those come back, that data is automatically pulled into the Power App. The data is then integrated into the legacy system. So, yeah, there's been much praise for that changed way of working in that one service that the charity worked with. And then from there, what we've done is we've made that standard. We've made that the normal business process, so not a thing that we did in the pandemic in one location because we absolutely had to and it was all we could possibly do. Because it's worked so well, that's now become the standard process of how we do things in that charity, rolling it across all of the locations, with really, really minimal impact on the frontline service teams. So that's been a fantastic way of demonstrating that we can deliver value in the frontline during the pandemic in something that affects lots and lots of people with a huge impact. And some of that work has then led to some other work that we've been doing that I want to touch on. So then if we look at back office automation, then there are, in the UK at least, there are some charities we work with who are quite small. So we range from the biggest charities in the UK to really small charities with 20 or 30 staff within them. And then on top of the fact that some of them are really small, some of them have also never invested in technology. And then some charities will have no systems, or they'll have real antiquated legacy systems that don't really meet their current needs, let alone their needs for the next 2, 3, 4 years. And there's also a lot of dual and triple keying. So although in my role, I get to work with charities that want to automate, charities that are the most forward-thinking charities in the UK are asking these questions and asking to be involved in the Power Platform work and being interested in the work that we've already delivered. But there is this generally across this sector, there's been little change in how lots of things are done for a very long time. So some of the things we've been working on in back office with some big and medium-sized charities in the UK are things like starter processes, and again, utilising Power Platform. So primarily we start lots of things with a Microsoft form or with a triggered task in a legacy system, or with an export of data from a set of legacy system that we can then pull into Excel, and then utilize Power Automate to say, if this, then that. So write that on this line here, or put them into SharePoint lists. So we've started stacking Microsoft's Power Platform and 365 solutions one on top of the other. And then we just started splitting out more and more processes in these organizations. And they're really typical things that take a long time, were a lot of hassle. So as you would imagine, there's apps for expenses, using OCR, using standard Power Platform solutions. And plenty of the other people who speak at DynamicsCon will take you through how to do some of that stuff, or will have a template for that. So there's things like that. There's things like desk booking, which has been really important during the pandemic, where you've had to blank out desks between desks so that you've got enough space around the office to move freely and protect people from COVID as much as possible, but also to know who was in each location at each given time. So we can, if we find out that somebody had COVID, then we can quite easily track back who was in the office because we collected the data and kept it either in Dataverse or in a SharePoint list. So some of that stuff's been beneficial, and we've gained extra benefits on top of it just by moving the data, which has been really interesting. And then things like issuing technology to people when they've been in their own homes. So like shipping phones to people, shipping laptops to people that used to be stacked up in the office for their first day. We haven't had the luxury of doing that and bringing them in all cases. So we've utilised Power Platform solutions, forms and automation, Power Automate, Power Apps to do all of the sorts of things that you would typically had to do in the office before because you'd never really thought about them. And I think on the back of office automation thing, then we have the ability, once we've done something for somebody, to then be able to replicate things that are similar across different types of charities. So I was working with a cancer charity, and they were struggling to work out how they were going to give nurses expenses who were looking after people, because typically they'd done that on paper or via email. And then I then had another charity in a completely separate sector who still needed the ability to do an expense to the public. And all of a sudden we realised that these things look quite similar, although they are completely different organisations. The needs can be quite similar. And I think a lot of the back office automation is like that. And therefore you can learn from best practice across different types of organisations and different things that other people are doing. So I suppose here is a key time. If there are any questions around things like back office automation, it'd be really useful if we could have those in the chat, and then I can discuss those at the end of the session. And I think one of the key things to do, if you're thinking, okay, in our charity now, what we want to do is we want to automate, we want to do betterment work, we want to do more with less. This is really important. How do we start doing the Power Platform? And I suppose you can start that with problems. So you can do things like looking at the 7 wastes of lean is probably a really good way to start that. So if you've ever studied Six Sigma, Toyota principle, Six Sigma for service, anything like that, then you're looking at the wastes of inventory, waiting, overproduction, overprocessing, motion, defects and transportation. But I think in services, at least, so like service-based charities, often waiting can be really, really key, particularly if you've got people who are having an emergency, they're at a point of need, they urgently need something, food, water, basic healthcare, taking care of, talking about their mental health, whatever that thing is, the waiting piece, sitting in a queue waiting for someone to key something in is really, really detrimental to the way that you help support people. So I think possibly review each of these it could be a good starting point. And the other thing you could do is either 5 whys or this thing that's called Ishikawa, which is a type of root cause analysis. So 5 whys is really simple. You write down a problem and then you ask why 5 times to each of the responses to that until you should get to the root cause. Alternately, you can draw out a diagram that looks vaguely like this, a fishbone diagram or an Ishikawa diagram, and start breaking down some of the elements of the problem. And then from when you've drawn that out and spent some time workshopping that, you can then circle the things that you think are key in order to have worked out, we have this thing, this frustration, this burning thing. What is it? Where does it come from? What do I need to do with it? Where should it go? And I suppose the other thing you could just do is ask people for their pain points or pick off one thing to get started with. And I think this goes back to that thing where we're talking about, do we do the entire digital transformation and try and get that funded first? Or do we jump straight into the fact that because we already use Microsoft 365 by default, or Office 365 at least, and therefore we've either got these tools already included in our license fee, or we could get some of them very cheaply, very, very cheaply. Then should we just go and build one automation? So one Microsoft form, and then build a Power Automate off the back of it, and then trigger that to go somewhere, say a SharePoint list, or which can drive an action, a planner task, an automated email to somewhere or someone that can enable you to get one thing done. And I'm a strong advocate, deliver something, and then from there you can have an argument on this is what we wanted, this is what it cost us, and this is what it delivered. I think once you can demonstrate that, it's easier to then be able to go and do the next piece and pick off the next item, rather than feeling like, oh, digital transformations, everyone's got one, let's find someone to run our entire digital transformation. Because I think that can be somewhat unfeasible if that sponsorship isn't coming from the right person. So that's kind of where I might start. And then I think one of the key things that we should discuss as we're wrapping up on this are, in the light of Dynamics Con and their beautiful graphics, we should really talk about your superheroes. So who are the people who, if you start looking at doing this change work, doing hyper automation, utilising the Power Platform, who are the sorts of people that you should get involved in that? So you can identify people who are change champions, who are the sorts of people who are leaders in technology in your organisation already, or the people that have always got the next best idea. So getting them on board can be really useful. Obviously, your IT team. So whoever does your IT, whether that's internal or external, having conversations with them, getting them part of the equation, bought in, understanding what licenses you've got in Microsoft, what Microsoft funding is available, which is really, really key to this, because charities typically get a significant percentage off and some grant funding. So the IT team can be really useful in making sure that you're taking up any opportunities that you've got to do even more with less, because the licensing for charities is so good with Microsoft, and particularly on Power Platform. any digital team that you've got, typically fundraising and comms in the UK we have in lots of charities, and therefore some of those people generally are digital adopters, early adopters of change, and very interested in technology. Anybody that's some sort of innovator within the organisation. Obviously, because charities, ultimately at the top of a charity is a trustee, then trustees can be vital in getting bought in and understanding why transformation might happen. And that can be tricky depending on the sectors that they have experience in, because lots of large-scale digital transformations have been very expensive and painful for some organisations in public sector, particularly in the UK, and therefore getting them bought in can be challenging, but sometimes that's of enormous value. If you have any volunteers that might have technical skills, might have technical expertise, or might be really passionate about this, then sometimes there's a huge opportunity to utilise them to do that work. And anybody that might be able to help you out with pro bono work or donors can be really integral to helping you do some of the change work or helping you identify what the next best steps are. So I think go find those people, work out what it is that they can do for you, and start having a conversation about the fact that you're conscious that Power Platform could help you transform your charity quickly, lightly, cheaply, easily. You could utilize best practice. You could build something quite light, cheap, easy, and you could be doing more with less, helping more beneficiaries, addressing the mission of the charity. And really, if you work for a charity, then they're the sorts of things that you want to do. So really, these tools are just an opportunity to be able to do that. And I suppose if you do want to find out more about that stuff, then please reach out to me. But if there are any questions at all, then please put them in the chat, and I'll answer any questions at the end of the session. I want to say a huge thank you to DynamicsCon and the Dynamics user group for the opportunity to speak to you about how we could help charities to do more with less, utilising the Power Platform and Microsoft 365. Thank you.
Well, good afternoon, everybody. We just finished a great session presented to us by Stephanie Stasey. Thank you, Steph. It was great. We got some questions in the chat, which I'm going to start with. And the first question was actually more of a statement, and then the question follow-ups. The problem, I'll just read it as is, and then Stephanie, you can pick up with an answer. So the problem with all this automation is that you need good processes to build on. And building an automation process doesn't do much if the process is still very laborious and intensive. Wouldn't it be equally important part of this process of improvement to, I guess, improve the process first and have a clear understanding of the process before we go to the Power Automate?
Yeah, I think that that's completely right. And in honesty, when we've worked on these with clients, what I typically do is get somebody to walk me through their manual process step by step. And we workshop it together, get some people in the room, and somebody by default will ask, why do you do that? Or we can ask, well, why do you do that? What's the impact of that? Why is that necessary? Why is that step necessary? How can you do it that way? And I think some of that is, if you already have somebody who understands what process gold looks like, particularly in back office processes, because they're quite similar regardless of the type of organization that you work in. Your starter process, there might be a great starter process, and that's not necessarily dependent on the type of organization or the type of charity you are. So those sorts of things you can get somebody to help facilitate. And I would say draw out that process map end to end, every single granular step of it, and then look to work out how you automate that process. Because often you will spot opportunities for that process to become leaner by drawing it out and asking questions of people. Because quite often, if people have always done what they got told to do, they probably haven't stopped to say, well, why do I do that then rather than at this time or in this way? And I think that's a great opportunity before you then just go straight in and automate what you already have, is to ask and probe at those questions, draw out the as is process map, and then draw out the to be process map. And if you can find any opportunities for refinement and improvement in those steps, that can be really, really useful. And I think by default, when you start to ask and try and layer the tools on top, then it helps you to realize some of the antiquated processes or some of the waste in some of the processes you've got. But I think often when we've done this, if you ask people for their pain points, then some people will already volunteer with that, some of the solutions. Like, you won't even need to, in some cases, go and do something like an Ishikawa or a 5 Whys or a root cause analysis. You should, but somebody will by default stick their hand up and go, I think we should just do that instead, quite quickly, quite vocally. If you can identify those people, then that can really help you do that as is and to be process a lot better. But yeah, I don't recommend building on top of taking a poor process and just building that into automation to make it leaner, because at the same time you're still investing in something wasteful rather than something more streamlined. Sorry, Andre?
Okay, well, thank you very much for giving us a very extended explanation on this. So the next is more of a statement, Stephanie, and I'll read it, and we would like just to know your opinion on this. Darlene is saying, I use the manual process mapping as a failover plan in the risk management planning and automation process mapping. So what can you say on this? What can you comment?
So you keep the old process in case the automation were to fail. I think that's the nature of the question, and I think that's not a bad thing to do. Although I am finding that Power Platform is stable, I'm not finding challenges with it falling over or failing. So it's not something that we've really experienced, and therefore we don't have that fallback. I mean, it's always good to be risk mitigated, but we haven't had any experiences where Power Platform has fallen over for us, and therefore we've had to enlist the previous or the antiquated process in order to get through it. So that might be interesting to know a little bit more about that in chat, if possible, so I can understand a bit more clearly why you would need to keep that process and what the scenarios are that you might envisage that might fall over.
Okay, we're getting more questions in the feed, so I'm going to continue on. Chris is writing, hi Steph, I enjoyed the presentation. I work part-time as a virtual IT director at UK charity. I can see potential for a Power Apps in the charity I work in. Is there a way to visually demonstrate these tools in action to show what's possible and start to build that interest?
Yes, I think we can. So depending on the charity, particularly if somebody in the UK, reach out and we can do a demo, we can have a little workshop, we can understand what the type of challenge is, and we can demonstrate some of the things that we've been able to build in other customers inside our environment, and also just understand a bit more about where those pain points are and what sort of things there is appetite to try and fix. So yeah, I think start with getting someone to come and help you workshop that, and particularly if you're in the UK or Europe, do reach out to us at SmartDesk. Otherwise, reach out to some of the other MVPs or some of the other experts that are around in Dynamics Con if you're in other parts of the world. And we'll take you through that. We'll show you what we've delivered. We'll talk about use cases that we've been able to demonstrate, and then we'll help step you through how to start utilizing Power Platform and realizing those opportunities.
There is one more question from Marco.
Okay.
He's asking, is Power Platform an add-on to a Microsoft product family such as Great Plains Business Central, and what can it deliver?
So that's a really good question. So it's both standalone and the ability to integrate. And I think it's really important to think about both the Dynamics solutions and Microsoft 365 solutions, as well as, so like what we used to call Office 365, and kind of see it as this the best collection of developer tools there are anywhere. And the Office, Teams, and Dynamics 365 can all fit together with Power Platform on top of it. So Power Automate typically is the way to move from Business Central, Great Plains, or CE into another one of your solutions other than Teams, because that's fully integrated. So the integration's already baked in to Power Automate, and Power Automate is really the way to get the other Power Platform tools and Dynamics playing together nicely, if that makes sense. And the work's already done for you in terms of the integration there, as well as the custom integration and all of the 600 integrated tools that are already built into the Power Platform standard connectors. So yes, it's already there. You can take advantage of it, but you probably want to start with Power Automate rather than a separate app. Because Power Apps is essentially Dynamics without the backend, without the engine, without the dataverse that you already have. So it's essentially the front part of it. And therefore, by default, you wouldn't think to add a Power App unless you're going to do something different with it. But yeah, Power Automate into any of the other functions. The other interesting one at the moment is Power Virtual Agents in Dynamics CE. So for Dynamics Customer Service, you've got live chat agents, the ability to have a IVR through Power Virtual Agents, and the ability to type up the entirety of the conversation and produce a note, like an end of conversation note in a call center. So I think all of those sorts of realizations of benefit, much similar to you know, in Teams, files is actually SharePoint presented in Teams. I think you're going to see more and more of how these solutions weave together, whereby Microsoft are just layering the solutions on top of each other in a really easy way for you. So it's a lovely user experience, and they're just layering their products on top of each other. So you're adding the benefits to each other. And I think consciously there's expected to be released some more products in Power Platform in the next 2 months. So I don't know what they are. You'll have to stay tuned, but I think there is a lot more opportunity growing. And I really think that realizing that benefit of that being that best collection of tools anywhere in the world from one of the largest software houses that exists is really key to delivering benefit here.
Well, thank you, Stephanie. I think the next one is actually continues on the subject that you just started the conversation about. And Josh is saying, an example of how you could implement this is new user creation for your help desk. How much of that is a Word document manual process? Could you create a portal and app that users can submit the information to? That would help out.
Yes. So I'm assuming Josh is referring to an IT help desk, or at least I'll ask the question, assuming there's an IT help desk. There's a couple of things you could do. And it really depends on who you're supplying that help desk to, where they're based and what other solutions they've got. So if they were all to be internal, by default, you could serve something up in Power Platform. But if you've got external users, perhaps, who've not all got a 365 license, then possibly there's something called a Power Apps portal, whereby you pay per login. So particularly useful if you do have volunteers, or if you do have external users who are likely, you wouldn't want to license them to have a Power App license that you pay for monthly. You'd want to just then be able to log in when they do. Particularly expenses is a good example for this. If you've got a lot of external users that get to occasionally claim an expense, you'd set up a Power Apps portal. They'd create their own login. They'd log into that. They'd record their data. And that's still approved, but it's not, you wouldn't need a license to attribute to it, either a 365 license or a Power Platform license. And then you just pay per visit for people to come in, and you just draw those down off your bill. And that's the most economical way. It's the easiest, lightest way for them, because they can sign in from Google, sign in from Facebook, those sorts of things, rather than having to remember their passwords. So you've got some authentication without necessarily burdening them or overburdening them. So you could utilize that. So they could record a ticket in there, and then when there's a response, they get an email, and then they can pop back in. Alternately, you can stitch all of the solutions together. We've been building with one of the clients the ability to, it's in a slightly different use case. It's in their HR team. For a large organization, it's the ability to empower virtual agents, start a conversation with them. So if they say my phone is broken, validate that question via the chatbot that is live all of the time, 24/7, even when that team isn't working, and then answer some of those questions, and then gather that data together into what's essentially then becomes a ticket, and then ask them to confirm, and then that can then submit the ticket to them. And that can go into a variety of places. There's a Zendesk integration in 365. You can send it on an encrypted internal message. You can control that into a task. You can add it to one of your other systems. So that's really up to you as to where that message goes, but there's the ability to provide a bit more clarity. And I think that's really beneficial, because what you want to do ideally is understand more of what they needed to provide you in order to be able to give them a response. Because I think often what we see is somebody asks the question, but actually what they need to do is give you a lot more information, but they don't know the information. They don't know the questions that you haven't asked them. Whereas something like Power Virtual Agents has the ability to carry on asking the questions until it's got enough information to essentially submit that as a ticket that can then be resolved the next time that somebody comes in. Andre, have we got time for another question, or do we need to wrap up?
Well, I think we may have time for one more question, if there are any more questions remaining in chat, but I don't think so. There is a statement that confirms from Josh what you just described. So, Stephanie, do you want to say a couple of words at the conclusion of the session?
Thank you so very much to everybody that's joined, and to everybody at DynamicsCon, especially you for agreeing to moderate, because that's made this a lot easier. And if anybody does need anything, please reach out. My contact details are here, or contact me in the chat, and I'll help with anything that I can assist with.
Well, on my part, first of all, again, I would like to say thank you to Stephanie and everybody who attended this session, as well as to the organizers for providing us with this great opportunity to reach out to the user community. And as a follow-up to this event, please visit our forum at www.dynamicsuser.net. And thanks for attending.